everybody's getting older. No. The way this country's going, no way. Yeah. Slow.
Good evening, church. Great to see everyone out tonight. Hopefully you guys are getting prepared for the possible winter weather coming in. Glad that you're here tonight with us, though. Just a few announcements for our young boys. Lead us in a few songs tonight before we head to class. Those we need to continue to remember in our prayers. We did get word that Sister Brenda McLean is going to be seeing her doctor for another lumbar puncture this week. So keep her in your prayers as she gets ready for that procedure to hopefully clear up some things going on with her. Also continue to remember our brother Mike Chun and Mark Tidwell's father John, as well as our sister Sue Carter, as they're all recovering from different things. Also continue to be mindful of Sheila Harper with the passing of her sister Sharon Cunningham, who many of us got to know over the last couple of weeks before she passed. That memorial service will be Saturday in San Antonio, Texas, so be prayerful for that family as well. We also got word that our sister Marge Reyes came up through our youth group and in our college group. Most of you know her, and her dad, Ben Calderon, who led the Hispanic congregation in Conway for many years. Ben lost his father, Marge's grandpa, this week, so be prayerful for that family as well. A few things we have coming up. Number one, classes are back in session now, so all classes will be going on tonight. Even our college students, the college class will be back meeting in the college classroom as well. So all classes are back on for now, so hopefully you know which one you're going to attend tonight. This coming Sunday, February the 6th, will be the Youth Group Carnival. That's going to be after evening services, and everyone's welcome to attend that. If you have any questions on that, you can see Daniel. That is going to be this coming Sunday after evening services. Make sure you have on your calendar YOU. That's going to be coming up February 18th and 19th. Also, the Teachers Appreciation Banquet is scheduled for Saturday, February the 25th, so make sure you get that on your calendars as well. Once again, it's great to see everyone here tonight, and we'll turn it over to our young man.
I will call upon the Lord. I will call upon the Lord.
readiness for classes. Dear God, thank you so much for another day that we can be together, that we can praise your name. And God, I just pray that through this time that we're encouraged. God, that you're also blessed by us being here together as your family. God, I pray for the teachers tonight. And God, I just pray that we all listen attentively and learn better how to bear your image in this world. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Check. There we go. Thank you, Albert. Good evening. My name is Brian Smith, in case you don't know me. It was almost exactly 2 years ago that we started the first quarter of the year teaching this book. And it was obviously 2 weeks before COVID hit, and I think I taught the very first lesson in this book, and I don't know that we ever got to lesson 2. And so 2 years later, we're getting to the end of it. And Don Riddle and myself and Michael Ledbetter, and there may be somebody else that's helping us teach, but we're tag teaming Steve Norris. I left him out. But we've been talking about a sense of presence, and that's what the book is on. And I hit my slide by mistake. So how many of you have, and I hope there's some conversation, because if there's not a conversation, we'll probably be out really quick tonight. So, but how many of you have rituals in your daily life, or know of rituals in your daily life, or know someone that has them? That could be, go ahead, Don. First thing every morning he goes to his desk, he's got a list of names that he prays for. Awesome. Anyone else want to share one? Could be work related, could be spiritual. Coffee. They have the ritual of coffee. You drive the same way to work every day, kind of thing. So what I want to put some thoughts for consideration before you today, and we'll talk about, were there religious rituals in the Old Testament? And of course, we know that there were. I've listed a few here. Can you think of others, or does any of these stick out to you as being, what do we mean by ritual? Regular practice. Practice makes perfect, right? Something done the same way every time. So, do we have religious rituals today? This side of the cross. Not a trick question. I got at least 3 elders in here, so they may need to bail me out if I get in a hole here. Communion? Y'all agree with that? Is that a ritual? I'm sorry, what'd you say, Chris? Rituals are a sin? Well, we'll kind of go around that subject today, and we'll come to a conclusion. Can rituals? Okay, to Chris's point, are rituals a bad thing? You kind of saw my next question there, Chris. Well, can they be a bad thing? That's a great point. If so, how so? Okay, you have a ritual where you pray every night before dinner, but you've checked that box and you don't say any more prayers the rest of the day. So I'm going to step out on the edge here, and I grew up in the Church of Christ, so I think I have the grounds to say some of these things, but it's changed, right, in the church today. But when I grew up in the building, the old auditorium here, it's pretty much 2 songs and a prayer. Now, I don't know that I see some of the senior folks that have been here as long as I have. I don't know if that's a ritual. I don't know if there's anything wrong with that. But y'all have examples from your home congregations? Don't need to know names, but are there things like that you feel that could become rituals?
Well, I remember Herman Maxey talking to John years ago, Herman, and he was saying about changing the time on Sunday night. And he was saying there was some people who thought it was scriptural that you had to stay to 6 o'clock, you couldn't change to 5. And that is not the Bible.
A great example of a ritual. And along those lines, I don't know if I'm sorry, was there a comment back here? Yes. Not using a songbook. I actually moved away from Conway some time ago, 20-something years, 25 or 30 years ago. And the congregation I went to was a little bit forward-thinking, I guess, if that's the right term. And they had the songs projected up on they had just gone to that, actually. And there were people in the audience, members of the church, that did not think that was scriptural. The same ones we sing. It just had the words up on the screen, like you see them now. They just weren't in the book; they were on the screen, and so that's a great example. And I was pleased with our elders. Not that they have to have my approval on anything, right? But look at what we've done the last 2 years. Kind of to Michelle's point, that's a pretty big thing to say we're going to discontinue Bible class, or we're going to meet at our homes, or we're going to meet virtually. That is, at first take, or you first hear that, for me personally, that was whoa now, let's think about this. John. Yeah, and if you couldn't hear what John said, he was just adding more examples of, 2 songs in a prayer, or always a song of invitation. And that becomes, we kind of all know about when Steve's ready to finish. You kind of, when you, as together we stand and sing, we anticipate that. So, so how does that, what's my point here? And so my question, go ahead. I think you've seen my notes, because what she's describing is if you're doing something that could be a ritual like communion, if you're doing it for the right reason, your head's in the right space, there's nothing wrong with that. But if it's just rote memory, it's that time to do it during the service, that could be it could separate you from the presence of God. Is the point here? Yes, sir. I agree. Great point. Yes.
I was in a church in a location that I was a pastor in an outchurch practice. I went to Swiss, and they served communion at one time.
One for the whole congregation? One cup for the whole congregation.
And the bread was unleavened, but it was whole wheat. I took it.
So these are great examples, and it's really so. Let's look at Matthew 5, verse 8. We've heard the saying before that seeing is believing, right? Well, the chapter that we're in tonight talks about being, your heart being in the right place helps you to see God. Would someone read Matthew 5, verse 8, please? So, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Very familiar. What do you think makes a heart pure? What is a pure heart? Pure heart. Honest? Sincere? Trustworthy? Wow. Not thinking about unclean things. So the bar's raising, right? One that's filled with the Spirit of God. Not polluted. So let's look at a very familiar story. Let's turn to 2 Samuel. And I'm going to read chapter 12. I'm going to read verses 1 through 13. It's a familiar story. But this is kind of the after story of David's sin with Bathsheba. And of course, we know that not only did he was in an adulterous situation, but he basically had Uriah, her husband, killed, sent him to the front lines. And so Uriah's been killed. So chapter 12, 2 Samuel verse 1. So the Lord sent Nathan, the prophet, to tell David this story. There were two men in a certain town. One was rich and one was poor. The rich man owned many sheep and cattle. The poor man owned nothing but a little lamb he had worked hard to buy. He raised that little lamb, and it grew up with his children. It ate from the man's own plate and drank from his cup. He cuddled it in his arms like a baby daughter. One day a guest arrived at the home of the rich man, but instead of killing a lamb from his own flock for food, he took the poor man's lamb and killed it and served it to his guests. David was furious. As surely as the Lord lives, he vowed, any man who would do such a thing deserves to die. He must repay 4 lambs to the poor man and the one he stole, and for having no pity. Then Nathan said to David, you are the man. The Lord, the God of Israel, says, I anointed you king of Israel, and I saved you from the power of Saul. I gave you his house, his wives, the kingdom of Israel and Judah. And if that had not been enough, I would have given you much, much more. Why then have you despised the word of the Lord and done this horrible deed? For you have murdered Uriah and stolen his wife. From this time on, the sword will be the constant threat to your family. From this time on, the sword will be a constant threat to your family, because you have despised me by taking Uriah's wife to be your own. Because of what you have done, I, the Lord, will cause you and your household to rebel against you. I will give your wives to another man, and he will go to bed with them in public view. You did it secretly, but I will do this to you openly in the sight of God and of all Israel. So up until this time, David, prior to Nathan talking to him, was rolling right along. No sign of presence of God, or he wasn't worried about the presence of God. In verse 13, David confessed to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. So this woke David up. His heart was not in the right place. Let's turn to Psalms 51. And this is, of course, David. And in verse 16, he says, talking to the Lord, he says, you would not be pleased with sacrifices, or I would bring them. If I brought you a burnt offering, you would not accept it. The sacrifice you want is a broken spirit, a broken and repentant heart. O God, you will not despise. So David had come to the conclusion, he realized that his heart wasn't right with God. So 2 points here is that a ritual does not please God if your heart's not in the right place. And David clearly wasn't seeing the presence of God prior to him being made aware of his sin. So, let me go forward here. I guess I'm hitting this thing without. So, can you see that picture? So, is there a Bible verse that you can think of looking at that? It's a stretch, but once I tell it to you, you'll probably see the correlation. Be thankful, for the Lord is good. Okay. Wasn't the one I was thinking of. So this was me about 30 years ago. I was working for a company. I was new to a management role, and these things called computers and email was starting to come about. And several of us went to Little Rock to a class where we were going to learn how to use a computer. We were all going to get desktop computers, and we were going to learn how to use them. So I actually knew the technical guy that was going to do the training. He was from Shreveport. We were all from Little Rock, but I had met him a few times. Really, really, really good guy. His name was Frank Hughes. I still remember him. But the group of people in the room looked like Fred Flintstone here, this caveman. They were like, man, what is this? And I'll never forget it. And it was at that moment that I learned what really the true meaning of a Bible verse that I'd heard all my life. He looked at me, he said, Brian, it's like pearls before swine. And I looked at him, I said, what do you mean? He said, you guys don't have a clue what you're dealing with right here. You have no idea the power of these things. You have no idea how to use them. You don't even know what you're looking at. And he was right. I mean, he was exactly right. And when he said pearls before swine, I got to thinking, that's what that means. You know, I should know that. But, and that's Matthew 7, verse 6. Does someone have that? I could read that real quick. I know you know it. So, you know, as a kid, I heard that verse, and not, you know, I could visualize a pig, and I kind of knew what pearls were, but you know, I figured, you know, I didn't know what it meant. And as I got older, I'd read it several times, but never put a lot of thought into it until he told me that day. And then when I was reading this, you know, this chapter in this book, it's about seeing God and feeling His presence. And I wonder how many times in our lives He's there, we just don't see Him. We're not looking at the value of something or the possibilities of something or seeing God in something. I'm not saying God was in these computers, but I'm saying we were a room full of people that had no idea what we were, the value of what we were looking at, what could become of what we were looking at. So can you think of, so that's a biblical, you know, we're kind of doing a biblical reference there, but can you think of some other examples? I'll give you one so to kind of get your brain going, but can you think of another example in just everyday human life where it's an example of pearls before swine? The example I'll give is because I was one, I never had a new car till I was probably married 5 or 6, 7 years. But I remember my first car, and I had no idea, you know, actually it was my parents' car. My first car was probably one I bought, and I did realize the value of having a vehicle. But you think about a kid with a new car. Do you think they really understand the value of a vehicle? Other examples. Pearls before swine. Now this is a scripture reference, but I'm thinking worldly just to give you some context. Great example. I see some of these young kids, 5th graders, whatever, with iPhones, and it's kind of like the computer thing. Yeah, they can do things on it that I can't do, but do they really know what all that will do? Do they really know the power of what they have before them? And it's a pearl before a swine. You know, they just don't. They can't understand it. They haven't been taught that. great example, I'll repeat that, just paraphrase, is a child that grows up in a good family. And then maybe they get out in the world and realize, wow, I didn't appreciate my mom and dad as much as I should have. And Mike, I thought where you were going, probably where you were going, but I mean, look at, I'm an older guy, right? But I mean, think about America and some of the things we take for granted. We're still wealthy, wealthier than most nations, if not all nations. And I don't know that we realize that. Prices are going up, that's right. So what's the point here? And I'll get to the point and bring it back to the scriptural, biblical lesson, is that God's always present. And if we don't feel His presence, now I'm preaching to myself here. I'm not saying, I'm not your role model, okay? But I'm saying this applies to me, it applies to you, it applies to Steve sitting back there, it applies to our elders. If we don't feel God's presence, it's because we're not looking. We're not trying. And much like the pearls before swine, that room full of computers and a bunch of knuckleheads that had no idea and didn't really want to. We were laughing at it. We thought it was funny. So God's always present. And so I want to talk about some examples of how things that are right before us, some of these rituals that we have. How can we feel God's presence? So I'm going to take a communion, for example. You brought that up earlier. I think it's a great example. I do think it's probably qualifies as a ritual. I think if it becomes a ritual, then that's dangerous. So just a few questions. Because we do it, and I appreciate the fact, I'm giving the elders a big stamp of approval, by the way. I really appreciate the fact that we changed up when we observe communion. We used to do it at the end. Now it's in the middle. We've separated it from the offering. And I'm not sure all their thinking on that, but I think making it less ritual and more meaningful and making you stop and giving you an opportunity to stop and think about it is huge. So, do we feel God's presence when we take communion? Every time? If not, why not? What are the distractors from that? So John's example is we're not focusing. We're just reading the same scripture. We're going through a ritual process. And I'll tell you what did it, not what did it for me, but what really was a slap in my face and made me realize, I remember prior to COVID, in my ritual prayer, somebody said that Don has his prayers, but he prays for people, so it's a little different. But when I try to focus on the Lord's Supper, my go-to to get my mind right was I would try to see Christ on the cross, and I would thank God for this opportunity, and I would thank God, and I would pray. I always prayed this prayer, and this became a ritual for me. My prayer was, please, don't take this opportunity away from us, because I know that there's places where they can't observe the Lord's Supper for whatever reason. And I always used to pray that. And it became kind of a checkbox for me that helped me think. And then COVID hit. And we weren't meeting in the building anymore, for a spell. We weren't passing the trays like we traditionally did. We converted to the styrofoam and the grape juice. I'm sorry, the bread and the grape juice there. We finally upgraded. I'm sorry. So we've upgraded from the styrofoam. But But, I mean, I really, for the first time in my life, 60 plus years, that was threatened for me and for us, right? We couldn't commune together. We couldn't observe the Lord's Supper together. And that's the word communion is, doing it together. And that really shocked me. And I thought, well, maybe I wasn't praying hard enough. But then I got to thinking, no, you didn't mean, you were distancing yourself by checking your box. So I'm running late. I didn't think I would. But, so those are just some distractors. Kids are distractions. If you're a parent with a small child, I pray for you, right? Because it's hard to focus sometimes. So the inverse or the opposite of that, what helps you focus? What helps you feel God's presence during communion? Did you say blessings? Okay. Mark says thinking about our blessings, thinking about God's creation, all the things that we have. How about prayer, right? Dedicating this 5 minutes that we take to take communion. Try to clear your mind and think of good things and think of the cross. Those help. And I'm going to get off communion here, but another thing that could make this a ritual is if you sit in the back like I do sometimes, and if you're an usher like I am, there's occasion, I'm not judging anyone here, but oftentimes, as soon as communion is taken in the middle of the service, people might get up and leave, and they have their reasons. I'm not judging that, but in some way, it's like I did that, so I can go. I came here to take communion, and I can go, and that's okay. I think. I'm not judging what people's motives are. I'm just saying that's a ritual. If you got to check your box, and okay, I've put my check in, I took communion, I'm good to go. I think the pure heart has more than that. So, does the bell ring at 7:20? Okay, I had some other thoughts, and I'm going to finish with. And I'm the guy out in the hall usually as ushering, saying, "You need to cut it off in there. Class is over." So these are just some thoughts here. I want you to take these home with you. Think about them. How can you feel? What can you do to feel God's presence when you're struggling with worship? How can you get more focused on God during worship? How can you get more focused? How can you feel His presence? If you're not feeling His presence in worship, you hear the people say that, "Yeah, I didn't get much out of the lesson today." If you said that, you probably didn't put much into the lesson, right? And that's so true. I believe that. But think about how your prayers can be more meaningful, how your Bible study can be more meaningful. And so I'm going to close with this because I want to be respectful of the parents that have kids. This is not mine. You've probably seen it and you've probably heard it. And as I Googled it, the guy in the caveman, I've learned how to use one of those things. I can Google. There's several authors to this. I've seen different names as the author. I've seen unknown as the author. But I'm sure you've seen it. I hope you can see that. You might not be able to read it, but it's Footprints in the Sand. And this is someone wrote this. It says, "I dreamed I was walking along the beach with the Lord, and across the sky flashed scenes from my life. From each scene, I noticed 2 sets of footprints in the sand. One belonged to me, and the other to the Lord. When the last scene of my life flashed before us, I looked back at the footprints in the sand. I noticed that many times along the path of my life, there was only one set of footprints. I also noticed that it happened at the very lowest and saddest points of my life. This really bothered me, and I questioned the Lord about it. Lord, you said that once I decided to follow you, you would walk with me all the way. But I have noticed that during the most troublesome times in my life, there's only one set of footprints. I don't understand why in times of need, in the times I needed you most, that you would leave me. And the Lord said, my precious child, I love you. I would never leave you. When there was only one set of footprints, it was when I was carrying you. And I know you've probably heard that before, but that's pretty powerful, right? I mean, God's there, and if we don't see him, then we're not looking for him. We're not looking for what he's doing for us in his presence. And I'll close with Matthew 28:18, and then we'll be dismissed. I didn't mark that one because I knew I could find Matthew. Y'all got to have a sense of humor. 28:18, the Great Commission, we've heard it. Jesus came and told his disciples, I have given you complete authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you. Be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So Jesus is always with us. God's always with us. We just got to get our heart in the right place and find him. Thank you for your comments and feedback.